Hey guys, welcome in. Welcome to 30 Books in 30 Weeks. And this week we are studying from my favorite book ever, Loving What Is. This book changed my life. It taught me how to not fight with reality. The battle with reality, you will always lose. Reality will always, 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 always win. What's going on, Mark? Hey, Pamela. Thanks for joining me, guys. As you all are coming in tonight to share this video with me, please share it out, invite some friends to watch along. If you're coming in for the very first time and you don't know who I am or what this is about, my name is Marcy Batiste. I'm a public speaker, I'm an author, and I'm a success and recovery trainer. I live life on Mars. I'm sold out to my happiness, and my favorite thing in the whole wide world is to work with women to help them discover and embrace their star power. And I also have a training company called Bankable Success Advisors, where I work with businesses and individuals to help them optimize their personal and professional investments so they yield the best return in optimal time. So that's a little bit about me. This is 30 Books in 30 Weeks, which is a personal development reading journey that I embarked upon originally last year in November. And so we've been doing this every single day since last November. So we're going on almost 4 months now of daily shares from various personal development books. And so right now we're in week 7 of the 30 Books in 30 Weeks, because at the beginning of 2018, I changed the format and decided I was going to do one book each week so that we could take a little bit deeper look at some of these books, because I realized that a day wasn't long enough, and a month for one book was a little bit too long. So I thought a week we can cover a pretty good variety of subject matter and get the concepts of the book really out and share that information out. So that's what I've been doing since January. If you've missed the videos, they're all on my YouTube channel. You can feel free to go. There's a link to that in the title of this video. And I titled this tonight, The Worst Day of My Life. Not because today is the worst day of my life. First of all, there's a couple of things about that phrase, the worst day of my life. Number one, if you woke up, then congratulations, you've already survived the worst day of your life, whatever that looked like. Every single challenge, every single obstacle, every time you hear yourself say, this was the worst day of my life, then you wake up the next morning, congratulate yourself, and thank your higher power that he saw you through that experience. So that's one thought about the worst day of my life. The second thought, and why I titled this the way that I did, specifically as it relates to the subject matter in the book, is because the worst day of your life might end up being the best day of your life. I know for me, the worst day of my life that I could remember in any sort of recent years was the day that I was physically assaulted by my relationship partner. And that, while it was the worst day of my life in some respects, those of you who follow me as I share about domestic violence and the teaching and training that I do on that subject matter know that that event changed my life. It forced me to change how I think. It forced me to change how I interact with people. It forced me to change how I do business on a personal level, professional level, day to day, every single day. It forced me to be very selective in my circle. It forced me to really get clear about the kind of people that I want around me, and how I allow people to get close to me, and how I teach people to be in relation with me. And that was the same thing. One of the things that I love about this author, she shares her story of how she came to the realization of what this process of loving what is and deciphering reality, how she came about it. And for her, basically she was on like a 2-year depression binge, for lack of a better term. She said she didn't leave her house. She worked from her bed. She did everything by phone. And finally, she realized, I need help, and no one would help her. And so she ended up checking into a rehab facility for, hey Joy, hey Helen, what's going on, Mark? She ended up checking into a rehab facility for eating disorders. She didn't even have an eating disorder, but it was the only place that would take her. And she, like I said, she knew she needed help. She didn't know what kind of help she needed. And so throughout that 2-year process, she said, she shares in the book, that she was so angry. Her kids were afraid of her. People were afraid to deal with her. They avoided her. And she knew it was a problem, but she didn't know how to fix the problem. And that's what a lot of the situation that a lot of us find ourselves in. We know that something's off. We know something needs to be different, but we don't know how to go about making it different. And so she checks into this rehab facility for eating disorders. She's so mean and so awful to the people there that they kind of isolate her, and they end up putting her in, she says, in an attic room by herself. And she said she was in that attic room for, a few months, and actually slept on the floor. There was a bed there, but she said she didn't feel worthy of even sleeping in a bed. That's how low her self-esteem and her self-worth were at this point in her life. And it was truly one of those moments where she said, she describes it as she woke up the next day, or she woke up one morning, and all of a sudden everything was better. That at some point she had thought through and got into a real honest conversation with herself about how she thought about things, how she interacted with reality. One of the things that she shares is that we're oftentimes not disturbed by what has actually happened to us, but we're disturbed by what we think about what has happened to us. And so she's talking about, after those 2 years of depression, she had learned at some point to kind of start talking to herself, start asking herself questions. And that is that power of the inquiry that we're going to learn about this week. And these 4 very, very powerful questions that when you exercise them on a regular basis, they will become muscle memory for you. They will become second nature for you. I remember when I first began studying this book, it was about 6 or 7 years ago, after the domestic violence. So it would have been 2012. And at first I was like, so I read the book and I tried to understand the concepts. And so I went about my way to try and figure this stuff out. And so I began trying to practice this inquiry process that she describes. And it was so bad that I would try and ask myself these 4 questions in this series of questions in order to bring me back to a place of reality and not be operating out of emotion. And it would literally, someone would say something to me and I would have to stop in the middle of the conversation, recite these questions to myself, recite the answers to myself, think it through, and then respond. And I remember it being so bizarre. Like, it felt bizarre to do it, but I exercised it continuously. I was very diligent about it. I was very, very intentional about it, because what I knew to be true was that if I didn't fix myself, and I didn't fix how I thought, and if I didn't fix my low self-esteem, then I was going to continue to make the same kinds of choices that I had been making. And if I got into another abusive relationship, the next one I might not come out of it alive. So for me, it felt like it was life or death, similar to her being in this rehab facility, this locked away in this room. Like, you reach a certain point where, and oftentimes it is like the worst times of your life, where You are so broken. You're so hurt. You feel so desperate just for things to be different, where you'll get to the point where you will try anything. And that was, for me, it was like, there's a country music song that says drugs or Jesus. Like, you turn into one or the other. It's going to be drugs or it's going to be Jesus. And so for me, this book was the drug that I needed. It was that thing that I could turn to. This process was something that I could invest in, be intentional about. And then when I started to see results, when I started to feel better, because suffering is mental for the most part. We suffer based on how we feel about the things around us and the people around us. We're not suffering because the people exist. We're suffering because of what we think about the people, if that makes sense. And so, it's our own internal narratives that give us our sense of self. And it's that sense of self that drives and controls your self-worth. And last week we were talking about the left brain and the right brain, and we were talking about how the left brain is very logical when we were talking about God winks and coincidence. And the left brain is logical. The left brain wants very much to make sense out of everything. And so what we have taught ourselves to do, or our left brain has taught us to do in our thinking patterns, is to make sense out of nonsense sometimes. So things that don't really have rhyme nor reason, things that don't really make sense, we will create a story to make the pieces fit together and make them make sense in our minds. But oftentimes it's not the truth. It's a distortion of the truth, because until we can make it feel logical, until we can feel like it makes sense, we keep adapting the story. And it's that a story that we're attached to. And it's that attachment that's creating the pain. Because we're putting ourselves, we're interjecting ourselves oftentimes in a story that doesn't even belong to us. It's not even our story. It's something we're creating. It's something we're crafting about an experience that we've been through. And we don't even necessarily know the background. We don't necessarily know the reasons why. And so really, that left side of the brain, that logical side, is a way for us to rationalize. Like, we're trying to make sense out of stuff that really doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense because it's not our stuff most of the time. It's somebody else's stuff. And how are you going to make sense of someone else's stuff when you don't have all the information, you don't have all the background, you don't have the pieces of the reality that you need to truly come up with the facts. Hey Terry, what's going on? I'm good, thank you. So that's that rationalizing piece. And so that left brain can become very, very powerful and teach us to tell ourselves stories and make them make sense in our minds, whether they're true or not. And so this power of the inquiry that we're going to talk about this week is when you begin to question, is this true or not? And if this is true, how do I know it's true? If I truly feel like this information that I have, this story is true, then how do I know it to be true? And it's so powerful, because once what I realized when I began practicing this and thinking this way, was that most of the time I had no facts. I had no facts to prove that the story I had told myself, that my left brain had created in order to rationalize and create this story to make it make sense, I had no facts. It was based on opinions. It was based on thoughts, and thoughts that were not even fully formulated at some points. And so this inquiry process really allows us to retrain that left side of our brain. And it allows us to, thanks for sharing, Terry. It really allows us to take away some of that storytelling, because we'll buy into our own story. We will buy into it, whether it makes sense, whether it's really truly logical or not. We'll convince ourselves that there's logic to it, and there oftentimes isn't. And so when you begin to do that, you start unraveling a lot of those painful experiences. And so what my clients hear me say all the time, you have to reframe the story. You got to reframe, and then you have to reclaim the attachment to it. You have to disengage oftentimes from the story and reattach at a later point in the story, because it wasn't intended for you, and that's not the way the story was supposed to go, but you filled that in so that it would make sense. And so it's those stressful thoughts that create the pain. So if you can correct the stressful thoughts, then you can thereby reduce the amount of emotional pain. And so for me, that curing emotional bankruptcy, that's where this came from. It literally came from learning this process, because I cured my emotional bankruptcy from retelling and reclaiming how I tell the stories about reality, and learning to truly accept reality for what it is. The book is called Loving What Is. And that saying, you hear people say all the time, it is what it is, but we don't really know what that means. But it really is what it is, and it will always only be what it is, and your past will always only be what it was. But whatever story you told yourself to rationalize that past is what's causing the pain, oftentimes many, many years later. So that's kind of the layout for how this process works. And tomorrow night, I'm actually going to go into the inquiry with you guys. I'm going to share with you these 4 incredibly powerful questions, and I'm going to share with you how I learned to use them, and how I applied them, and how I continue to apply them now almost 7 years later, so that I don't keep retelling and reclaiming stories that don't belong to me. I'm fully happy to let people have their own story, and nor do I feel like I have to get them on board with mine. I'm okay with them telling themselves whatever the story they need to tell themselves about me. Far be it from me to change that. So I really worry about me. So that's that living life on Mars, that's selling out to my happiness, my red bottom attitude. You see that back there, red bottom attitude? That's what that's about. I don't retell other people's story, and I don't try and convince them of what their reality or their experience should be like. I just live my own. All right? So that's it for tonight, guys. I can't wait to share the inquiry process with you tomorrow, and share those 4 very, very powerful questions, and teach you guys how to really make this stuff work in your lives and in your businesses. All right. As always, I appreciate you guys for joining in. Thanks for sharing the video out. Thanks for following me on YouTube. And as always, more than anything, thank you for living life on Mars. Talk to you guys soon.